And all of that is great, but what you also have is talent, and that's the most important thing.
We are here today with Gregg Murphy, an Emmy Award winner, former sideline reporter and play-by-play announcer for the Philadelphia Phillies. He's a Jersey native, South Jersey native, who went from Holy Cross High School to St. Joseph's University, and he covered everything from high school sports, college, MLB baseball, and even the Super Bowl. So thank you so much for taking your time, Gregg, and welcome to the Open Mic Show.
It's great to be here, Mike. Yeah, thanks for having me. I love the name of the program, by the way. That's awesome.
Thank you. So you were an English major at St. Joe's, and you began broadcasting the Hawks basketball games, the men's basketball games on the radio.
Yeah.
What did you learn from that experience, and how did you get that opportunity?
You know, it's funny. So I went to college. I went to St. Joe's thinking I was going to go to law school when I was finished, and that was the plan. So that's why I kind of majored in English. And when I got to St. Joe's as a freshman, my roommate, who was really into music, asked me if I wanted to go to a radio station meeting and be a DJ with him. And I was like, yeah, all right, I can do that. So we went to the meeting, and while we were at the meeting, this was my first semester freshman year, it was a room full of maybe 20, 25 people, and they said, does anyone here a sports fan? Anyone want to do the basketball games on the radio? And honest to God, it was myself and one other person that raised their hand and said, yeah, that sounds like I'd do that. That's cool. So I started broadcasting the games my freshman year at St. Joe's and did it for 4 years. And by the time I got to my sophomore year, I thought to myself, this is really what I want to do for the rest of my life, rather than go to law school and actually work for a living. So I got very lucky, and I always thank my roommate whenever I see him for getting me involved in that radio station, because it paid off all right.
And when you walked in, was basketball something that you saw yourself doing in the future? Was that the sport that you wanted to pursue, or was it at that time you just loved the being in the radio booth and it was anything you get your hands on?
It was really more that, I hadn't given it a whole lot of thought, to be honest with you. And so St. Joe's really only had a men's and women's basketball program that you could broadcast. I did broadcast one baseball game at St. Joe's my senior year, but that's just because a bunch of my buddies were on the team. But so basketball was what was in front of me, and I jumped at that chance. But when I started to think about what I wanted to do, I thought I wanted to be a studio sportscaster, a guy behind the desk working for the local news or for ESPN or Comcast Sportsnet, stations like that, as an anchor behind the desk. So that was kind of my thought process as I was graduating college, to try and get a job like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, because it's interesting talking to you, Gregg, because you didn't have the traditional path to becoming a broadcaster of Major League Baseball games.
No,
No,
I do not.
Your first job out of college was to help produce a sports memorabilia show over at HSN and QVC, and you're also a co-host. And then you went and moved to Channel 69 WFMZ. Just talk to me about that process. That was in Allentown. Just talk to me about that whole opportunity and experience.
Yeah, so when I got out of college, it took me almost a full year to find a job. And believe it or not, that same roommate that helped me get into the radio station was working for a sports memorabilia company in South Jersey. And he saw that they had a position open for a assistant television producer, and he passed that along to me, and I ended up getting that job. And while I was at that job, I started to kind of tell the folks that I wanted to be on the air, that I wanted to go on television. And eventually they put me on QVC and Home Shopping Network, and then Sports Channel, where I hosted a show on Sports Channel. And I was selling sports memorabilia, but that really wasn't what I wanted to be doing. I was on television, and that was cool, and I was getting a little bit of experience, but what I wanted to be was a sportscaster. So after about 2 years of doing the home shopping stuff, I decided I had to get out, and I had to find something else. So I applied for a job up at WFMZ in Allentown. They were looking for a weekday sports reporter, and I got the job. And so I spent about 3 years, around 2.5 years up there in Allentown, kind of really perfecting my craft. I was a one-man band for a while. I was shooting my own video, editing my own stories together, but I was covering all kinds of stuff from professional sports right on down through the high schools. And it was unbelievable experience. It allowed me to really kind of make the mistakes that you can make in a small market before you get to a bigger market, and kind of learn and figure out, what it was that I enjoyed doing and telling stories and that kind of thing. So that 2.5 years that I spent at WFMZ was probably the most important 2.5 years of my career.
Right. And then you moved on over to CN8. And then just talk to me how you went from CN8 to In Between the Lines.
Yeah. So again, kind of crazy and kind of lucky, because I think in our business, you need a little bit of both. I left WFMZ when I had my first child, because I was commuting up to Allentown. It was an hour and a half each way. So I found a job hosting the Inquirer High School Sports Show in Philadelphia, which was on Fox. And I did that for about a year and a half. And while I was there, I met someone that was going to be part of this new CN8 network that was starting, a guy named Bruce Casella, and he urged me to kind of come on board with them. It was a brand new venture that Comcast was doing. So I came in as like a sports producer. I wasn't on the air. And then after a couple of months, believe it or not, the first thing, well, September 11th happened in 2001. And I was a sports producer at the news at the time. So when everything was happening that morning, our news director called everybody in to work. And so I jumped in my car, I got down to the studio, and I walked in, and she looked at me and she said, "You've been on the air before, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Go, I need you to go cover and get in the car and drive to Shanksville, where Flight 93 went down." And I ended up spending the next couple of days reporting live for the news on CN8, and really spent the next 2 weeks covering the aftermath of 9/11. And then when things started to get a little bit back to normal and sports were happening again, I went back to the sports department. But at that point, they said, "You know what? You did a good job, so we're going to put you on the air covering sports." And that's kind of how it started. And then I was able to work my way up.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. So I'm assuming doing the news and doing sports has to be like a completely different gig, but it's still the same in some aspects.
Yeah, it's different in some ways, and it's very much the same in others. You know, the way you put together a story, the way you tell a story is the same no matter what kind of story you're telling. But obviously, sports is meant to be fun and lighthearted for the most part, whereas news, and especially news at that time in our country, was very sad and disturbing and dark. And so, I'm a sports fan, but I'm also a pretty happy-go-lucky guy. So I tend to not want to do the news stuff. There's too much sadness and heartache on that side of it. So I was pretty happy when I got back to the sports side of things.
Yeah, and speaking of happy-go-lucky guy, I wanted to ask you this. You've had the pleasure of interviewing a lot of different people and a lot of different personalities throughout, athletes and sports. I wanted to know, does an athlete's personality change the way that you conduct an interview, or maybe the questions that you ask, and maybe the way you prepare, or do you just do the thing?
That is such a great question. That is a really, really smart way of looking at this business, honestly. And the answer to that is yes, yes, yes. Because if you know that you have an outgoing personality, if you know you're interviewing a guy like Andrew McCutcheon, right? And we have all seen Andrew. I mean, the guy could be in Hollywood, be on the big screen if he wanted to be. Just over this effervescence that comes out of him at all times and everything. When you know you're interviewing a guy like that, yeah, you prepare completely differently, because you know that you can go places that you can't go with Chase Utley, who is very, you know what? Let's talk about baseball. I don't want to talk about myself. I'll talk about my teammates. And so yes. You have to prepare very differently. And you can have great interviews with both kinds of folks. But I think when you go in with the preparation, if you do have a sense of their personality is outgoing, you can do a whole lot more. And with a guy like Chase, or the guy, JT Realmuto, guys that are a little bit closer to the vest sometimes, you just have to be prepared to ask a lot more questions, because you need to pull some stuff out of them. And as guys get warmed up, they tend to give you a little bit more. So, I always tend to, if it's a sit down interview like this, I tend to start with the kind of basic stuff and then get them warmed up a little bit, and then start, trying to get into the more personality driven things. So, but honestly, Michael, thinking about it that way is really, really smart. So that was a great question.
Thank you. Yeah, and because I've seen you do a lot of interviews, and one of my favorites last year was Nick Pivetta. I'm sure I don't have to say much more.
Just seemed to all be working. Yeah, the game plan was tremendous. JT was the rock back there for me, and we just attacked these guys and got ahead. And You know, we're here and we're doing great, so we'll just keep going.
Yeah, I remember it well.
Yeah. But so that was another question I had for you, because obviously this is something I want to pursue and do myself. If someone says something like that, or something just out of nowhere happens in the middle of your interview, in the middle of what you're doing, how do you keep yourself together? How did you? I mean, I'd be laughing or just like, oh, well, back to you, Tom.
Yeah.
You know?
And you know what? That's really all you can do. When it's an instance like that, where someone drops the F-bomb, or someone, says something, a curse word, or, that we've all heard 1,000 times. And, you can't say that on television. We all know that. He immediately said, oh, I didn't mean to do that. And I laughed, and it was kind of forgotten. I think that's how you have to respond to those kinds of things. But you do have to be careful, because I've been in other situations where I've been on talk shows, the host of a talk show, and you have four guys, I don't know if you remember Daily News Live, that setup where there's four guys on the desk, and we're talking about sensitive topics, and somebody says something that is, borderline, inappropriate, or borderline racist, and your reaction to that is very important as well. Because you can't have the same you can't laugh at something like that. So you have to be engaged in your conversations, especially when a camera's rolling and a microphone is on, because even if you don't have an ounce of that in your entire body, if you react the wrong way, the viewing public is going to see it and say, well, he thought it was funny, that comment that guy made. So, it's the things we think about all the time when we're on the air, because you do have to, you have to make that split-second decision on how to react to something. So
yeah, I saw Carmelo Anthony get dumped in the head with water, and he slipped up and said something. I've seen you get dumped with coolers of Gatorade. I mean, I don't know how you keep it together over there.
Yeah, well, I've had a lot of practice of keeping it. Every once in a while, maybe off camera, I might let one go, but it is important to remember, that other folks are going to see that. So yeah, you got to do it. You get used to it, honestly.
So do you have a particular game or a memorable call that is just your favorite, it tops everything else?
Oh, I don't know if I have anything that tops everything else. I mean, I think back to the very first game where I called a Phillies game as a play-by-play guy, and I was way in over my head. I never called. I mean, literally, I did one baseball game at St. Joseph's, and then 20 years later, I was sitting about getting ready to call a Major League Baseball game for the Phillies, with nothing in between. But I remember it being such a surreal moment. I was sitting with Jamie Moyer, was the color analyst at the time, and it just struck me that, wow, this is really happening. You're about to call a baseball game for the team you grew up watching and loving, and not many people have sat in that seat. It's probably, I don't know, maybe less than 10 that have ever gotten a chance to do that, 15 maybe. So that was one of the moments of my career where I just had to pinch myself and be like, my gosh, this is really happening. And then the next day I did the next game, and Mike Schmidt was my color analyst. And then it was just like, whatever. Now I'm calling a baseball game with the greatest guy to ever wear the uniform. So.
And you got to stay like it's nothing and professional.
Yes, yeah. and I couldn't, because I was just like, gaga over it all. So it was very nerve-wracking, but it was very exciting as well.
Well, Greg, we'll end our conversation with one of my favorite segments that you guys used to do, and that's Minute with Murph.
Love it.
And you're going to answer a few questions for us. Ready?
Ready.
Hitters, DH or no DH?
I would have said, if you asked me a year ago, I would have said no DH. I'm a National League guy, and I'm a traditionalist. I liked the DH last year. I thought it added a lot to the game. So I'm a convert. I'm going to say DH.
I converted as well. Favorite game that you've ever been to, ever got to go to a game as a kid?
Best game I ever been to was in the 93 World Series. I actually went to the 15-14 loss of the Phils. But it was just such an amazing game, back and forth. It was a very, very memorable moment. I was there with a bunch of my college friends, so that was a blast.
Yeah, super historic game, and two historic stadiums, Fenway or Wrigley?
Oh man, I get asked this question a lot, and I always say Wrigley, and I think part of that is because I love the city of Chicago as well. But Wrigley is just such an awesome place, and they've done a lot to make it better, but keep that old feel. Fenway's amazing too, and I've got the chance to be up on the Green Monster and inside the Green Monster. But push come to shove, I'll say Wrigley.
Wrigley. Best hair, Ben Davis or Lou Tilley?
Wow. Well, let's see. I gotta give it. God, I hate giving it to Ben, but I gotta give it to Ben. Lou's was like a perm, you know? And I love the guy because he gave me my start. But no, I'll go with Ben, even though I don't even think he has the best hair on the broadcast team. I give that to Kevin Franzen. So that's it.
Different story. But who is the next sports team in Philadelphia to win a championship in your mind?
God. I guess if I'm answering with my brain, I'll say the 76ers or the Flyers, but I'll say the Sixers.
Yeah.
If I'm answering with my heart, I'm going to say the Phillies, but we got a little ways to go.
Yeah, me and you could be in that bullpen.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I can pitch, but.
Thank you so much, Gregg, for coming on the Open Mic Show. I really appreciate you taking your time. And
anytime.
We'll catch up and continue success to you.
Thank you very much, Mike. You too, bud.